Hello and welcome to the Unwasted Pain podcast. I am here with Chris Conley, and we really should introduce our guests, not appearing on camera, but every podcast we have Mo Conley, our dog, here, and I'm Karen, and it is so great to be with you. Thank you for joining us for this podcast. We have a great I like this part of the story. So if you've been following along with us on this podcast, really our heart's desire is no matter where you are at, we all have peaks and valleys in our lives. We all go through pain. We know that we're supposed to count it all joy when we encounter various trials, but that's hard. And so when we're going through challenging times, we want that pain to be unwasted. And so,
well, real quick, it just makes me smile to say, I like this part of the story. The podcast is called Unwasted Pain. And you're like, get me to the peace, get me to the promises.
Yeah, this is the better part of the story. So hopefully, as we've hit different parts of the story, all of our circumstances look different. Your journey and our journey is obviously going to be very unique to each of us. But there are these common truths that we find woven through Scripture, and these choices that we have. We can choose to believe and think on what is true and pure and noble, or we can just find ourselves in a valley and spiral. And all of us have been in both places. But our hope is that this particular podcast will give you seeds of hope in your valleys and also tools to help other people, because the people around you, if you're not in a valley right now, yay, praise God. But the people within your circle of influence need you to be cognizant of where they are on their journey. And sometimes in our journey, there were people all along the way that helped us get to the good part of the story.
Yeah.
And so if you are in a great place, that doesn't mean there's nothing in this podcast for you. I promise there is. But it does mean that you have an opportunity to hold up arms of people that you love and people that, whether they know the Lord or not, how you can speak truth and hope to them in their valleys. And so by way of a very quick recap, over our past episodes, we have talked about, we had an incredibly fruitful time in our season, 18 years, as we started and led High Point Church. And then in 2018, in the midst of just a very challenging season, probably the most challenging season either of us have ever faced, and you've faced plenty.
Yeah.
We ended up leaving Memphis for a season. We just needed to get away and be somewhere where we could hear from the Lord, kind of get out of the noise and the clutter, and just know and be still before the Lord. And so that took us to Atlanta, where we were in Atlanta for 15 months. And from Atlanta, as God did provide, and if you've listened to the podcast, you've heard a lot of that story, saw his faithfulness there, saw the manna there. But then there came this moment when all the manna looked like it was running out in Atlanta, and the Lord opened a door in Cleveland, Ohio. And though we only ended up spending 8 months in Cleveland, Ohio, despite the fact that we bought a house and thought we were going to be there for much longer, we look back now and realize, it was such a strategic part of the journey. And so 8 months into it, lo and behold, in the middle of COVID and all that stuff, the Lord says, okay, through Exodus 4:19 and 20, all the people who wanted you killed have died. Take your wife and children and the staff of God back to Egypt. And for us, we knew definitively that meant going back to the place that God had called us to continue the work that he had called us to. And so we ended up back in Memphis in, the end of July 2020, in the middle of COVID, deciding to plant a church, which is obviously by man's logic not a really great idea. But from that point forward, Chris, maybe you can give us just the quick summary of 2020, 2021, and 2022, and that'll bring us up to this year.
Yeah, so moving back to Memphis was a mixture of emotions. We never wanted to leave in the beginning. It is our home. We believe that God's given us a vision for it, but also it was coming back to a place that we left in some pain. And again, the earlier podcast detailed that whole story. But when we came back, it's all those first. The times that you're going to drive by the old church and feel those emotions. And not only did we drive by the old church, that when we moved back to Memphis, we moved into a friend's guest house that literally was 250 yards behind our church. We would walk our dog around the church. And so there was just some ways that God, maybe, I don't know, in a sense of a humor or just the wink of the eye of like, I'm going to make you
Face this.
Yes, face this, work through this, forgive, take the Band-Aid off again and again and again. But there were all those first that you're going to bump into somebody and, oh, you're back in town and what are you doing and all that kind of stuff. And so when we came back, and like you said, you said the middle of COVID, in many ways, probably more toward the beginning of COVID than the middle of COVID. It's like, how crazy that the vast majority of churches were shut down and we're trying to start a church.
Yeah. Let me just interrupt you because, again, just wanting to help make application to where people are. No matter what type of valley you've been through, you probably have those firsts. If it's a divorce, it's the first time you see some friends. It's going back home, maybe for the first time. Those kind of things, and I think honestly, there's more anxiousness in advance of them than just walking through them.
Sure, and for us, the vast majority of people, were grateful to see us back. Believe in us, want to see us continue to do God's work in this city. And then for some of those that there were strained relationships, then honestly, we would just be the first to go shake their hand, say, I forgive you, love you, want nothing but the best for you. And so, but it still creates that nervous energy.
Sure.
And it still has you kind of walking around, more aware of your surroundings than you never thought of that stuff before. But I would just say that it's a new beginning. But just because it's a new beginning, it doesn't mean it's an easy beginning. And most new beginnings, honestly, have a little bit of, it's a hill to climb in the beginning.
Sure.
And unfortunately, all the sowing and reaping that we had done the previous 18 years, that doesn't necessarily carry over. You have to kind of plow new soil. And you have to begin that reaping process all over again. It's one of those things that it just required new faith. We couldn't come back and just to do what we had done before. It was like one of those things that just because you've done this before, God didn't bring us back to do the same thing. Yeah. And so it required just all the things that we had learned from the valley. These new ways that God had built our faith and in many ways tested our faith, and then come back and say, okay, God, do we believe that you can restore? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that we've learned in this is that our God is not a God of partial restoration. He's a God of complete restoration. And I think for anyone that's been through their own crisis, their own season of adversity, you really need to believe that statement. He is not a God of partial restoration. We don't write songs about partial restoration. We write songs about the God that's not only complete or full restoration, but a God of double restoration. And we've even dared to believe double restoration. But when we came back, that first year was really still a COVID year. We missed like 20 Sundays in the first year. So it was kind of start, stop. And then the second year was in many ways kind of like our first year. And yet God had led us to this place of knowing that we needed to find a permanent home, but yet we were incredibly small. We were probably less than 75 people on a Sunday. And yet when we did all the research, we're probably going to need, $4 million minimum to either renovate something, lease something, whatever it might be. And so we began what we called building one city. And in that just began to say that we kind of felt like God gave us this principle that because we didn't know where we were supposed to go yet, just start the engine of the car and then trust him to drive it. Trust him to show us where. And it was toward the end of that year that God made us aware of an old Jewish synagogue that was just perfectly located in the center of the city. And so it really, everything about it just felt like, wow, this is God's provision. And so we began that process, and that kind of took us, into a place that I think it was March 17th, 2022, that we actually closed on the loan.
May 17th.
Yep, you're right, May 17th, that we closed on that loan. And again, a whole set of stories. We gave some of those stories of just God's provision. But in all of this, each one of these things has kind of represented like a mile marker through the wilderness. And when you think about the wilderness, when you go back to the children of Israel, if my memory is correct, it's like only like a 11-day journey, but it's an 11-day journey that took them 40 years. So depending on how you respond to the wilderness, you can have a 11-day journey, or you can have a 40-year journey. It's incredibly difficult to actually shorten the amount of time you spend in the wilderness, but it's easy to lengthen the amount of time you spend in the wilderness. And what we were trying to do through this journey is just say, okay, how can we learn what we're supposed to learn? How can we grow through this? How can we discover more of who God is? And then how do we get to the other side? And how do we cross over?
Chris, before you hit 2023, as you're just saying these things, I'm just reflecting on our journey. I do think when you've been through a valley that the human response is sometimes you're almost paralyzed. You're just like fear sets in. You maybe are hesitant to take a step forward, and maybe you've never been before, but just the jarring nature of a valley can kind of leave you at a place that you maybe hesitate to make decisions, or you're afraid something else bad is going to happen. And I would just encourage you in that way. One of the things, and we've probably said it in this podcast before, but God's not going to let you walk off a cliff thinking that you're obeying him. And so there is this tension, like as I hear you, talk about 75 people and a $4 million loan, like, don't do that unless you know that you've heard from God. Like, that is not the application. Like, go out there and risk all your finances unless you've heard from the Lord. But just in that place of knowing, sometimes you have to take that first step for God to show you what's next. And so I would just encourage you, if you're at a place of rebuilding, of starting over because you've been in a valley, that there's this place of, you're right, you can't, don't despise the day of small beginnings. And there are things that we took from our first journey that do help accelerate this part of the journey, but there are parts of it that it's just new ground, and there's not that transfer that maybe you would think. But either way, of just saying, don't fear that because something has happened in your past that maybe you couldn't control, or maybe you could control and made some poor decisions, whatever the case may be, that doesn't mean that that's your future. And so, yes, go before the Lord. Make sure through wise counsel and prayer and the word and circumstances that to the best of your ability, you are moving forward. But then at the end of the day, I think that's where we have been able to step forward, is to go, okay, God is for us. He is a God of restoration, and we don't have to live in fear. And we are not going to let the enemy steal our future as much as he attacked something in our past.
Yeah, I mean, the most natural thing to do is when you have lost things, is to have the insecurity that comes from instability. Mm-hmm. And with that, instability and some of the insecurity that you might battle, then it's easy to have fear instead of faith. And what we're trying to do is to say, actually, at times when you're at your lowest place, you use the term the valley, Jesus is still the lily of the valley. He is still present with you, and he doesn't want to leave you in the valley. And so, there are these steps of faith that you must take. And I really would view the steps of faith almost like a set of dominoes. You have to say, okay, what's the first step of faith that I can think big but act small? Okay, so I'm thinking big according to what God has promised. God has promised restoration. He's promised complete restoration. So I'm going to think big, I'm going to act small. And when I act small, I take one step of faith. He's not asking me to jump over the Grand Canyon, okay? And when I take that one step of faith, then that's going to, it's kind of like that illustration of if you have a flashlight in your hand and that flashlight has a beam of 20 feet and therefore you can see 20 feet in front of you when you're in the darkness. But if you take that one step, now that beam has just penetrated the next 2-3 feet. And so now you can see a little bit further and you can take the next step. It's a lamp unto my feet. And so in that way, I just would say there are big promises by God, but break down the big promise into individual steps of faith. And all of a sudden, again, instead of a 40-year journey through the wilderness, it can be an 11-day journey. For us, it's really honestly about a 5-year process. And in a unique set of circumstances, I actually told you, like when this happened, hey, I hope this isn't true, but this is probably at least a 5-year journey to see restoration occur in our life. And June 24th of 2023 was 5 years. And the way I would describe it at this particular moment is, we have stepped into the Jordan River. We have seen the waters part, but we're currently walking through that river. We're not all the way through yet. And so,
Get close.
but we're, in baseball terminology, we're rounding third base and we're trying to come home. But we're not there yet. But think big, act small.
Let me give maybe a practical example of that. And again, these things taken out of context can lead you, with misinformation. So there's always context to this. But in the example you had on our notes here, R for R. So in 2019, in the middle of our wilderness, and we've given this story, so I'm not going to elaborate on it, but really the Lord gave you a picture of a race for reconciliation. So that is big. And that feels like, seriously, like how can we ever just do anything about that? But we had enough faith to say, let's get a logo.
Yeah.
We have to have something tangible to be able to share with people. And so the first step was contacting a graphic designer and having him design that. And lo and behold, the next step was through a connection of his and some mutual friends, and he happened to be a graphic designer that was a believer that had done graphic design for Nike, who knew other people at Nike. And the next step of faith, and this is crazy, is we actually were invited to go out to Portland and share the vision of something that did not exist, that was literally through a sleepless night. But that was the next step. And honestly, even in that example, that wasn't like, oh, Nike's going to pick us up and here comes R for R. But it required us another step of preparation. We had to have enough of our act together to go out there and say, what would this look like? And so again, it's just, we're now 3 years into that. And literally it is, okay, I'm going to knock on the doors, Lord, and you're going to have to open them. And each way he has continued to do that, and we're seeing something that's a really big thing, but the only thing I can do is eat the elephant in bite-sized pieces. And again, only spending energy on that because we felt like through prayer, through circumstances, through wise counsel, and through the word, this was something that was not our idea, but it was God's idea.
Well, and I think what's important in this, wherever you are in your own individual journey of whether you're coming out of a crisis, walking through a crisis, unfortunately, sometimes you're about to enter a crisis, whether we know it or not. You know, wherever you are in that journey, it's important to have some mile markers along the way. You need to know that some level of progress is being made. You need to know there is a rear view mirror and you're not stuck. And that you can look back and go, we are making some level of progress. And then you need to have a sense of, okay, what does the new look like? And how do we, you know, like for us, it was an educated guess. We didn't know anything, but just to know that, hey, this is probably going to be 5 years. And so, you know, and then the way our restoration has played out, you know, it's followed that timeline closely. And so I think what's important is for other people in your family to have a sense of progress, to have a sense that this will end one day, to know that we can close a chapter and officially close that chapter so that we can write a new chapter. And that's important, you know, in a marriage. It's important with your kids, regardless of their age. We have, you know, adult sons and daughters, not kids. And then, you know, when you're in leadership, it's important for the people who follow you. So, you know, why don't you just introduce kind of what we did, you know, for Mark and Annika as we were approaching this, you know, 5-year anniversary. And instead of that anniversary being something that could be potentially negative or still have some level of hurt associated with it, how we really wanted to redefine what that 5-year anniversary was about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, as you were just saying, just mile markers along the way, there were points along the journey that the first mile marker might be, okay, it's 30 days later.
Check your pulse.
We're alive. You alive? I'm
Yeah.
alive. Man, we made it. Like, it is only going to get easier from here. Like, that was the epicenter of the earthquake. And you may not feel like you're emotionally, you know, healed or anywhere close to it. You're still just feeling all the pain of a valley. So some of those first mile markers, you might not like. I'm not doing okay. No, but you are still kicking and breathing, and God's still putting breath in your lungs. So there were days that it was that. Then there were days that we started saying, okay, we're doing this thing. Like, I don't even know what this thing is.
Yeah.
And then again, as God showed those different steps along the way, and we kept taking steps. And so as we came upon looking towards, I think it was honestly maybe around 3.5 years, somewhere in there, we just said, okay, we want to plan a trip that marks the end of this season,
Yeah.
that closes the chapter of the wilderness and marks all the ways that God has been faithful through the wilderness, that, you know, we didn't go without food or water. Our shoes did not wear out. We don't even know how.
And in that way, it's important to change how you remember the past. You know, one of the things that we talk about is that forgiveness doesn't change the past. It's definitely not forgive and forget. But forgiveness changes how you remember the past. And do you remember the past from a place of healing or from a place of hurt? And so what we wanted to do for one another and what we wanted to do for our family is really go back and recount all of God's faithfulness to us in the wilderness, in all the different ways that we have been healed, and remember the past from a place of healing.
So we did. We said, okay, we're going to put a date on the calendar, and we're going to coordinate with our adult son and daughter, and the 4 of us go away and have a fun trip. Something that would have been a part of our previous life, pre-crisis, pre-wilderness, something that would have been that type of caliber of trip, which honestly took some faith, because
Yeah.
we're not at this place financially where we were, and that was a much bigger commitment in totality to where maybe we would have been before the crisis. But we just decided we wanted to do something fun. We wanted to make some memories. And then in the spiritual marker kind of way, you know, the entire trip was But also, I think what sometimes we forget is that there needs to be moments that there's a moment where you're actually in present tense, eye to eye, talking about the past, the present, and the future.
Yeah.
And so we had fun. We went up to New York. We did a little Broadway. We went to a PGA event. We kind of
Not to a PGA event. We went to the PGA Championship. One of the four majors.
Yes, yes. I'm not
We got to
building
talk.
it up.
If we're going to talk sports, we got to really give it the right context here.
So the Conley, the four of us don't have a lot of things that we all enjoy equally, but somehow or another, all of us really enjoy watching golf. So one of our bucket lists is to do the four majors and the Ryder Cup, and so we said, all right, we're going to go for it, and we're going to go to the PGA Championship.
We've got the Open Championship. Now we have the PGA Championship. Mark and I have been to the Masters. The girls haven't been to the Masters yet.
Right.
I have done a U.S. Open. We need to get the whole family to the U.S. Open.
And we're praying for the Ryder Cup.
And we're hoping to do the Ryder Cup in 2027, I think it is.
Yeah, we're going to have to figure out a way to get those tickets. Yeah. But yes, so anyway, sorry, I did not mean to undersell the blessing that we experienced. But we did go up and to the PGA Championship. But there was a specific night that we were intentional to create an environment and be in a space where there could be just a dialogue. And so I feel like just from an application standpoint, especially as a parent or a spouse, it's important to have those moments because there's just something to closure, and there's something to sometimes when something challenging happens, you almost talk around it. And then if you're a couple years into it, you don't want to always talk about it.
Right.
But we wanted to look at it in reflection and see God's faithfulness.
Well, and because Mark and Annika were in college through most of this, we would just see them in short windows of time. And then, you give them a part of the story. You try to take different parts of the things that God is doing and the healing that is occurring and, the prophetic words that are being spoken and the provision that occurs, but they get kind of sound bites. And then, there's just, like you said, when you're present, you're wanting to try to just enjoy being with them and not necessarily have serious conversations all the time. And then, the phone is just kind of inadequate for some of these things. And so what we did is we said, okay, let's go and let's make sure the vast majority of this trip is just simply celebrating that, hey, we did it. Yeah. Not only did we do it, more importantly, God did it. He has carried us through this wilderness. We are officially ending a chapter. We are writing a new chapter. But we really felt like there was one night that we wanted to dedicate to after dinner that night, that we would just kind of tell the story from start to finish, but not the story of what went wrong, the story of what went right, the story of what God did. And so we actually began, in many ways, the story, which is how God provided for their college tuition, and just how we tried to do everything possible for none of this to inconvenience their college experience. And to show that how God cared for them through this process. And then, as we have tried to be a good steward of prophetic words and, have voice memoed those words and transcribed those words, then we pulled a few selective words out just to show them the wow factor of, God used someone to say this who knew nothing about us, and that this has come true, and now we're living in the reality of this. But in addition to all of that, then we were able to show them, all the remarkable ways that God has provided, for the new church, provided for R4R, and just while these new visions are coming to life, one of the things that we have said is that we believe that God is in the process of restoring us. We feel like we have been healed. We feel like we're healthy, physically, spiritually. We feel like, the visions, hopefully mentally, hopefully, the visions that God has given us, we see progress in. But someone once said, you're only as happy as your unhappiest child. And one of the things that we have said is we don't feel fully restored until we see our children restored. And so we wanted this kind of storytelling time of restoration to really be an opportunity for them to see what God has done, but also to see how much God cares about them. And so in that process, I had asked a friend, and this song will be used for many purposes, but I kind of gave her the concept that, the number 40 scripturally represents kind of completion. And in that, there's in the number 40 is used in so many strategic ways throughout the pages of Scripture, but you never see year 41, you never see day 41. And so sometimes, though, we feel like we're stuck in year 39. And so I asked her to kind of write a song about this concept, and the name of the song is The End of It. The end of the wilderness, the end of the adversity, that we are going to, complete this journey. And so there was a moment where, and it's a remarkable song, and it's a moment
As
where,
soon as we get it copyrighted, we'll share it with you.
that's right. That we just, before we went into, the place where we were staying, we just sat in the car, listened to that, and there's just something that music just, communicates in a unique way. It just touches your soul in a unique way. It opens your emotions, and it just gives you the ability to reflect, and it just set the tone for amazing conversation.
And I'm sitting here thinking, how much does God love us that we even had a song to share with our children? And you might be thinking, well, lucky you. There are actually online services that will write specific songs. So if you need a song to get out of your valley and to celebrate, you go online. There's a way to do that. So.
All right. Are you talking like AI? Or are you talking other services?
No, I saw something online that it's like a great birthday gift, and you can have them write a song about your spouse. I don't know the website, but I was just sitting there thinking, how amazing is that the Lord orchestrated for Becca to be in our life, who's so amazing, and gave her this song that just was. Anyway, I'm just saying it's not just us. You could do that too.
Yeah.
So, and it was powerful. It was powerful.
Absolutely. And so then, as we recounted all that God had done, we also got to a place where I had asked, somewhere in the neighborhood, 5, 6, 7 friends from not only around the country, some from around the world, if they would give a prophetic word for Mark and Annika. And I just told them, I said, only thing I want you to know is, at that time, Mark was 24 years of age. Annika would just turn 23 years of age. And just said, ask God what he wants to say. And it was amazing, the level of accuracy that these words had uniquely for each of them. And our 2 kids are radically different. Yeah. And yet you could just see how they tuned in a little bit more of okay, it's one thing for God to speak to mom and dad. Right. But it grabs your attention when God speaks directly to you from someone you've never met, but someone that is speaking things that are accurate, and those things actually build you up. They call you closer or higher to God. They increase joy in your life, and then they speak into the future in such a way that there's a promise of a better day. Mm-hmm. And so then that time together, it resulted in them sharing. I tried my best not to do the dad talk and just dominate all the time and not have them, engage or interact. So we just said,
You did well.
Tell us about your journey. Tell us where you are. Tell us where you are in the healing process. And then there was just some beautiful interaction between Mark and Annika as brother and sister, and just you and I, we just felt like it was a holy moment.
And I would just say, just in that, again, some of these things, that if we hadn't have had those moments, we wouldn't have maybe the ability to speak into this. But I would just say one of the things that the Lord was gracious to show us, and I think applies to anybody who's gone through a challenging season, is everybody in your family is going to grieve differently. They're going to perceive things differently, by age, by just personality. And so while we were celebrating the close of a chapter, we wanted to also just acknowledge and leave room that we're not saying, okay, you better get over it. You know, that's the end of this. We're fine. You should be fine too. But by just bringing this and having and showing God's faithfulness, I think there was, more closure that happened all the way across. But it's just important not to project or assume your path of grieving and healing is the only way or the right way, and just to give people room that just even when the death of a loved one, people respond differently, and just you've got to just, I think, be okay with that and know that God sees each person where they are, and that in these moments, just to be careful not to.
Yeah, there's not a, when you do something like this, it's you have some expectations, you have some hopes and prayers for desired outcomes, but it's really just about honoring the moment and saying we're going to talk through this for the purpose of trying to bring closure to have a new beginning. Yeah. So I couldn't agree more that I think there is that individuality where each person, travels through their journey at their own pace. But what we have seen is a lot of times, it's kind of like the recovery world. And, we've done a lot of work with Celebrate Recovery. When someone has a hurt habit or hang up, and they need to go through recovery, there's a sense that that's an individual process, that individual has to go through that. But recovery is never just an individual issue, it's always a family issue. And so in many ways, the family has to go through the recovery process as well. And so in this, we were trying to kind of, whether we knew that or not, or said it that way or not, just trying to say, let's create a moment that we will remember forever that gives us permission to say that chapter's closed, gives us permission to view that chapter from the lens of healing, and then gives us permission to write the new chapter, to focus on the future, and to all just say, you know what? God was good. He got us through it. Honestly, we stayed together as a family. We united together. They did a great job through their college experience. It's easy that when something goes wrong, it's easy for it to go even worse. It's easy for one bad decision to turn into multiple bad decisions. And so it just felt like a healthy moment. And honestly, we just wanted to share this with you just to create the idea of spiritual markers and to journey along the way so that there's a sense of progress, so that then there can be closure, so that there can be a new beginning. And I think maybe, for us just to close with this, we said earlier that right now we have stepped into the Jordan River, the waters have parted, we're walking through. And for us, I think one of the things that we've learned in this process is that you kind of go through this season of from surviving to stable to strong. And we're still in many ways trying to get out of the surviving category into the stable category. And then as we have started a new church, one of the keys to that is just to have your home. It's just like a young married couple that wants to maybe go from an apartment or from renting to have their own home. And so we have purchased this old synagogue. We're in the process of renovating that. And hopefully by the end of this year, we'll move in. And what I really anticipate is that first Sunday for us will be a crossing over moment. It will be that official moment of, okay, the waters are going to close behind us. We haven't forgotten the past, but we remember the past differently. We remember it through healing. We're actually stronger because of the past, and that we are now living in a new promised land. And hey, there's still giants to fight in that land, unfortunately. But I'd much rather fight new giants than old giants. Right. And what we're going to do is we're going to be ready for the fight. And we're going to fight the good fight. But I really pray and believe that for you and I, as a couple, for Mark and Annika to experience that day, honestly, for our church to experience that day, the people who have come and been a part of this new, I will never, never, never be able to thank enough. The people who have walked with us through the wilderness, held our arms up, believed in us, I will never, ever, ever be able to thank enough. I mean, these are stories of faithfulness that I will tell forever. These are crowns in heaven that people will lay at the feet of Jesus for the way that they believed and continued to come alongside and fight the battle with us. And so all of us need a crossover moment. And I think you need to put a crossover moment in front of you, to dream toward that moment, work toward that moment, believe in that moment, and then watch God bring it into fulfillment.
I was just sitting here trying to find on my phone the words to Breathtakingly Beautiful. We have another spiritual marker in our home, and it felt really weird staring at my phone instead of looking at you. So I didn't find it, but just those things that instead of remembering hard things from that place of pain, the spiritual markers allow you to remember those seasons from a place of faith, and help you, protect you from getting stuck. I think that's my biggest heart's desire for people who go through hard seasons, which is all of us. And hopefully this gives you a really tangible way to protect yourself and the people you love from getting stuck. That's what the enemy wants, is to get us stuck in our pain. But instead of being stuck, it can be unwasted. Instead of looking at things from a place of tragedy or crisis, being able to see that every season comes to an end and you will not be in your wilderness forever. And I hope that our story, up next, we have you were just telling me about an amazing guest that's going to be on for some of our future podcasts, that will really also give some additional tools of how to walk through wilderness seasons. But the best is ahead, not just for the Conleys, but for you. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us at Unwasted Pain, and we can't wait to see you next time.